All right. So this is going to be test prep for our letter from a Birmingham jail test that we will be taking next Monday and Tuesday. So I'm going to put this video together, and just like the last one, if you watch this video, I think it'll help you for the test. And so this is the review from the letter from a Birmingham jail, and these are some of the questions, some of the issues in the letter that we want to kind of discuss and spend some time focusing on. So we're going to go over that right now. Okay. So here we go. What is the primary reason for why Dr. King was in Birmingham? And why does he use the examples of such biblical figures like the prophets and the Apostle Paul? Well, you remember Dr. King begins his letter by stating as to why he's in Birmingham. Many people were saying that he did not belong in Birmingham because he did not live in Birmingham. And he said, look, I'm in Birmingham because, well, I've been invited here. I've been invited to come to Birmingham. I've been asked to come. And the work that I do with the movement of civil rights brings me to the city because I've been invited by groups that have the same goals that I have. But then he said, really, at the end of the day, I'm in Birmingham because injustice is here. And because injustice is here, I am here in Birmingham. Because injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere, he said, right? Remember that great line? So he's in Birmingham. Well, he says, I've been invited to come. It's the work that I do. This is what I'm trying to bring about. And so I'm here because of that. But really, ultimately, I'm here because, well, injustice is here, right? Things that are not right are going on. And I'm here to work on that. Why does he use the examples of such biblical figures like the prophets and the Apostle Paul? Well, Archbishop Brody is always quick to point out that whenever you hear people today talk about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., so often they focus on the fact that he was a civil rights activist, which he was, clearly. They focus on the fact that he cared about political issues concerning social justice, and clearly he was involved in that. But what is often forgotten about concerning Dr. King, says Archbishop, is the fact that he was a minister of the gospel, that his work, his whole vocation for the civil rights movement was intimately tied to the fact that he was a minister of the gospel. In fact, when you read the letter from a Birmingham jail, you see this just come through the letter. It bleeds through the letter, okay? It just runs through the letter throughout. And he makes it very clear that he sees himself in that line of a biblical prophet. Because what did a prophet do? A biblical prophet was somebody who proclaimed the truth of God, even though the audience he was speaking to or she was speaking to would often reject it. Dr. King knew that much of what he was speaking about, much of what he was preaching, would face opposition. But like the prophets of old, like the Apostle Paul, I will continue to preach the truth in season and out of season. Right? So he invokes the prophets and the Apostle Paul, these biblical figures, to remind his audience that he comes as a brother in Christ and a minister of the gospel of Jesus Christ. What are the 4 basic steps of a nonviolent campaign? And how did Dr. King follow these 4 basic steps? Well, if you remember, there's 4 basic steps, right? Dr. King lays them out in the letter. And the first step that he lays out is the collection of facts. Then he talks about negotiation. Then he talks about self-purification. And then he talks about direct action. Okay? And so what are those 4 steps and what do they mean, right? So obviously, whenever you deal with something, it is always important to go on a fact-finding mission. Okay? So before you complain about something, learn what you're complaining about. Come to an understanding of what you're complaining about. Do your research, okay? Study the issue. Don't just pop off your mouth. Don't just go off protesting. That's not what no, Dr. King says, no, let's gather the facts. Let's get as much information as we can gain. Let's learn. Let's talk to people on the ground. Hey, this is what's happening, right? So we gather evidence. We're on a fact-finding mission. Then, once we've done that, we now have got to begin the process of negotiation, right? We say, okay, this is what's happening, and we don't like it, and we're going to do something about it. And here's what we're going to do is we're going to protest, and whatever that protest might be. We're not going to shop at your stores downtown, or we're not going to go to this store or that store, right? And so you start negotiating where you say, look, this is what we're going to do. And then the other side, if they have a certain level of reason, right, they say, well, do we really want things to get that far? Do we really want to see our businesses get hurt? And so there's a negotiation going on, right? Give and take. You know what? I'm not going to protest if you do the right thing. But if you don't do the right thing, well, I'm going to protest. Okay? So there's a negotiation taking place, a give and take, a discourse, right? You want to have a conversation. The third step is self-purification, right? So you gather the facts, then you have a negotiation. So if you don't really get anywhere, now you have to begin the process. Okay, we are going to have to take direct action. But before we take direct action, we have to begin the process of self-purification. And self-purification means that we are going to have to recognize that we are going to probably face serious abuse, physical, mental, emotional. And so we have to be able to take it. We have to be able to endure it. And so he wouldn't just let anybody show up at one of his protests because he did not want people in any way acting out. He did not want that. Dr. King did not want that. He wanted people to recognize, okay, I have to be self-purified. I have to die to myself, and every legitimate right that I have to act out, to defend myself, I have to refrain. I have to hold back. I have to practice self-purification. And then lastly, direct action. Okay, so we've gone through these different criteria, these three things, and now we actually have to go. And in this particular case, what did they do? Well, they gathered the facts. That's what he did. He gathered the facts. He talked to people on the ground in Birmingham. He talked to those who were involved in the civil rights struggle. Hey, what's happening there? So he discovered through this fact-finding mission that terrible acts were taking place. Segregation was increasing. And so now he began the process of negotiation. So he talked to the incoming mayor, Boutwell. He was in conversations with the city council, and he was telling the business leaders of the city of Birmingham what they were planning on doing. And he was hoping and praying that they would let cooler heads prevail and that they would at least recognize that something has to be done about segregation. Then, when it came to self-purification, he spoke to the protesters. They gathered together. They prayed together. They spent time in worship and reading the Bible together. And they had to go through a whole process of what we call an examination of conscience. And then, at the last point, direct action, the sit-ins, the protests, right? The work to shut the city commerce down in the Easter season, right? Which would get the attention of the authorities. So that's what he did, right? So those are the four basic parts of any kind of nonviolent protest, nonviolent action, and what Dr. King himself did in order to fulfill those four parts. What is it about tension that makes Dr. King say he is unafraid of tension, and how can tension become a creative and transformative power? Dr. King is not afraid of tension because Dr. King, like others before him, knows that unless you have the tension of critical thinking, creative thinking, right? Unless you work your brain, if you will, unless you engage your mind, right? You're not going to have any growth. And we see this in the physical realm, right? We've talked about this in class. What creates muscle growth? What creates uh, record running times? What creates physical success, right? Putting your body through difficult tests, right? Working hard, right? Working out is intended to create a tension in the body, right? And at first, it hurts a lot. But without that pain, as they say, I remember there used to be a motto, no pain, no gain. Well, we might say in the spiritual life, if there is not struggle, if there is not dying to self, well, there's no spiritual growth. There's no spiritual growth. And so Dr. King's not afraid of tension because he knows that an authentic education in truth is going to provide a kind of intellectual tension. It's going to cause struggle. Remember, he talks about Socrates, the gadfly. And we said what a gadfly is somebody who asks the questions that people don't really want to answer. The gadfly is somebody who says, why are you doing it this way? Isn't there a better way? Have you considered this? This is right. This is wrong. Why are you allowing this, right? So the gadfly is somebody who's reminding people of questions that they don't really want to have to answer. And that was Socrates. Socrates' famous method of teaching the Q&A, right? The Socratic method. And so for Dr. King, tension is a positive thing that helps us grow as individuals, intellectually, mentally, and emotionally, and spiritually. And tension becomes a creative and transformative power because without that tension, there can be no growth. And so it's only by challenging the status quo, it's only by challenging leaving things as they are, that you could have any genuine growth, for example, in this case, concerning segregation. And we can talk about this in other ways as well, right? Other moral issues of the day that we have to face. And so Dr. King is talking about these things, and he is encouraging the people to say, look, tension's not a bad thing. Don't run away from it. It's an opportunity for us to grow as people. And without this tension, we'll never grow. What makes groups more susceptible to be immoral than individuals? I often think of social media and how mean and almost inhuman people can be on social media. Why do you think that is? So what makes groups more susceptible to be immoral than individuals? Well, Dr. King answers this directly in the letter, right? He says very clearly that people hide behind the mob, right? So an individual, right, one-on-one conversation over a cup of coffee, right? You're talking to somebody, and what happens, right? The other person becomes very human to them, right? You're sharing life experiences. You realize, this person's just like me. I like you. We get along. We're friends. I enjoy talking to you, right? There's a personal relationship that is developing. But with the mob, you hide behind, right? Negative and positively, right? In the sense of the mob creates a kind of strength in numbers. So if the mob, if you will, is saying, no, you can't do this, because you want to be liked by the mob, by the group, right? You don't want to stand out. You don't want to be seen as, oh, he's one of those. Look at him, fill in the blank, whatever that is. So you go along to get along, okay? We call it peer pressure, right? Where people are inclined to do what is right, but out of fear of the crowd, they do what is wrong, or they go along with the crowd. And then you have the other situation where, people who hide behind anonymity. So they act even worse than what they might act because they think, oh, I can get away with this. Look what I can do. Nobody will ever find out what I'm doing. And so they hide behind the anonymity. And when you think about social media, right, we see social media, we have this thing called piling on, right? Why is that? So leave that to you to answer. Now, why do you think that is? Why do you think we see cases of social media, which a lot of cyberbullying can take place? Anyway, how does Dr. King use ethos, pathos, and logos in the letter, right? Remember back to Mrs. Turner's class, Whenever you're giving a speech or you're trying to persuade an audience, there's three basic rules that writers and speech creators, content creators will tell you that you kind of need to touch on, right? And those three things come from the Greek language: ethos, pathos, logos. So ethos is an appeal to an ethic, right? A culture, a cultural appeal. Pathos is where we get the word passions from, okay? So pathos is making an argument that is emotional. It's an emotional appeal. And then logos is where we get the word logic from, right? It's an appeal to reason. So ethos is an appeal to culture, a cultural ethic, if you will, a cultural norm. Hey, this is who we are as Americans. We hold dear the Declaration of Independence, that all men are created equal. These are words enshrined in every document in our country. We live by it. We talk about it. So why aren't we living up to it? And so he appeals, for example, to the Declaration of Independence. That's kind of an ethos argument, right? We're Americans. Americans claim to be and justice for all. Americans claim to be a people where it doesn't matter your background, who you are, you're rich or poor, young or old, right? The Statue of Liberty. We're Americans. Let's live up to that ideal. In fact, he calls the Declaration the majestic words of the Declaration of Independence. Ethos, right? We're Americans. Now, pathos, passion, emotion. Remember when he talked about his children, talked about his daughter, talked about his son. It hits you in the heart. I shared with you how when I read that for the first time years ago, and I just had to stop the reading of the letter, because as a father, it hits home. I'm a parent. I don't want my child looking at me and saying the things that his son and his daughter said to him. How painful that is, how hard that is. And so it's important for us to recognize the importance of an emotional connection, right? People do not care how much you know until they know how much you care. Always remember that. That's true. You can come in a situation and be the smartest guy, but lose your audience. And then logos, reason, logic. This touches on the fact-finding thing, right? This touches on throughout the letter when he's appealing to people like Socrates and St. Augustine and St. Thomas Aquinas and Thomas Jefferson, right? He's talking about ideas, all right? He's talking about truth and not mere opinion. So he's making an argument based on reason, natural law, which is what he talks about throughout the letter. Dr. King references both St. Augustine and St. Thomas Aquinas concerning unjust law, and he says very clearly, an unjust law is no law at all. Explain how Dr. King escapes the charge of subjectivity when discussing just and unjust laws. Why do you think it is important to have a way to distinguish between the two, just and unjust laws? Well, Dr. King quotes St. Thomas Aquinas and St. Augustine on the matter of law because he knows that his audience is going to anticipate and his audience is going to criticize him for being hypocritical when it comes to keeping the law, when it comes to following the law. And he's going to say, Dr. King, look, you're breaking the law in Birmingham. You're breaking the law in Birmingham. See? Look what you're doing. You're not following the law. But now you're talking about laws and not keeping them and versus keeping them. So you support the 1954 decision vis-a-vis the Supreme Court and Brown versus the Board of Education. So you say, yay, let's support that. But over here, you're breaking the law concerning the Birmingham City Council or the Montgomery City Council regarding permits and laws and segregation and whatnot. See, you're a hypocrite. And Dr. King anticipates that charge. And he says, now you ask me a question. How can I distinguish between what a just law is and an unjust law. Is it merely based on my feeling, on pathos? He says, no, 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 no. It's based on logos. It's not based on whether or not I like a law or not. That's not what makes a law just or unjust. I may not like a law, but a law may be just and I don't like it. He says, no. In fact, an unjust law is no law at all because an unjust law degrades, strips human beings of their God-given dignity, of their humanity. A just law affirms and lifts up people in their dignity and their humanity. And a just law affirms equal justice under the law, no matter one's color, no matter one's background, no matter how much money they have or do not have. And so these things are very, very important for us. And so a just law is a law that is in conformity, he says, with the natural moral law as revealed by God. He appeals to the natural moral law, what he calls the eternal law of God. And he says a just law lines up with that. A just law affirms the truth about human dignity for all people. In the words of the Declaration that all men are created equal. Not some, but all. All means all. There's no exception clause there. And Dr. King points this out. And so the way we know that a law is just versus a law being unjust is, does the law affirm basic human dignity? Does the law affirm equal protection under the law? Does the law affirm that the law would be meted out equitably for all people? There's no tipping of the scales. That's how we know. That's one of the ways that we know. So is it in conformity? Does it conform to natural law? Okay. That's how we know. Why do you think it's important to have a way to distinguish between the two, just and unjust laws? It's important because without it, then it's just mere opinion, which is the problem of legal positivism, which is what we talked about very briefly in class, but this is important because it's going to come up later. Legal positivism is the theory of law that holds that a law, as long as it is posited, and that's where the word positivism comes in, as long as a law is posited or put forward by the proper authorities, and in our case, it would be the legislative branch, writes the law, the executive branch signs the law, okay, and then the courts allow the law to stand, okay? That's our system, right? That's what you learn in government. And so as long as that is done, then the law is the law is the law. You just have to accept it, okay? So language of just law and unjust law in legal positivism doesn't mean anything. If the law says you can do it, then it's fine. In fact, legal positivism might hold something like legality equals morality, even though they technically don't get into that argument. They don't really get involved in moral arguments, legal positivists don't. They just get involved in legality. Legality is all that matters, or illegality. So if the courts decide or the legislative decides to say that something's illegal, well, then it's illegal. And then if you don't like it, well, try to get people who side with you and write laws that change the law and make it legal, whatever it might be. All right. And so legal positivism is the legal theory that is dominant in law, the study of law schools. It is the dominant theory. And I cannot stress enough that it is absolutely a horrific and dangerous theory. Okay. And unfortunately, it's not just a theory because it's been put into practice for many, many, many years. Why is natural law necessary for building a just society? How does Dr. King rely on natural law arguments in the letter and in the civil rights movement as a whole? Why is natural law necessary for building a just society? Because natural law is not a respecter of persons. Natural law is a law that comes from above. It's transcendent. It's a law that we would say as Christians comes from God, but even if you don't believe in God, or if you don't believe in the Trinity, for example, you can still believe in natural law. In fact, some significant writers like John Locke and Thomas Jefferson would not have identified themselves as traditional Christians. They were Christian-like. They would have affirmed more of what's called the deism, which is the belief in a creator God, but not a personal relative God. Certainly, they would not have affirmed Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, but yet they held to the natural law. Countless others did as well. So the natural law is something that binds all human beings together, irrespective of religion, location, time, right? It's not based on the fact if you live in 2000 or you live in the year 1200. It's not based on the fact if you're from Africa or you're from Asia. It's not based on the fact of you having money or not having money, being an American or being a Brazilian. None of that matters with natural law. The natural law is a revealed truth about who we are as human beings, summed up beautifully in the words of the Declaration of Independence, the laws of nature and nature's God, right? We hold these truths to be self-evident. So a self-evident truth is a truth that on its own explains itself. And a self-evident truth, according to the Declaration, is, for example, the equality of all human beings. And that among these rights, rights that we all have, these unalienable rights, in other words, rights that are not given to us, but rights that are recognized by the government. The government doesn't technically give us our rights, but it recognizes our rights. Well, what you're dealing with in terms of the natural law there is, right, among these are the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Okay, so you have that right to pursue those things, to seek after them, and that we have the fundamental right to life. And so this is all based on the natural law. And so the natural law is not bound by time and place. It's not bound by anything temporal. It's something transcendent that we discover and that we come to know and we apply it. Okay. How does Dr. King rely on natural law arguments in the letter and in the civil rights movement as a whole? Well, I think the whole issue of segregation and desegregation or integration is based on the natural law, right? It doesn't matter what color skin you have. It doesn't matter your background. It doesn't matter where you're from. It matters simply this, that you're human, okay? We talk about this. I talk about this when I talk to the fourth grade, because in fourth grade, they learn about Alabama history. And one of the things that I'll talk about when I go and talk to them about history in fourth grade is Dr. King. And one of the things that I talk about is segregation and how natural law helps us, how the church, St. Thomas Aquinas and St. Augustine, help us come to understand what natural law is and how it's relevant for our lives. And so the issue of segregation violates natural law because it violates the truth that all human beings are created equal. And so we are all equal, okay? We're all the same. We are all the same in the eyes of God. We're all equal. All of us are equal because we all share the same human nature. And this is a great example of, think back to Mr. Wilson's class when you learned about things like substances and accidents, right? There is a substance of human nature. Then there's the accidents of human nature. That refers to hair, skin color, eye color, okay? Your, things that don't touch upon your being human per se. Okay. They're not, somebody could be born, for example, Somebody can be born with, let's say, um, uh, an arm that doesn't develop correctly. Does that make them any less human? No, God forbid. No, no, no. Or somebody might be born with, a foot. One of my brothers has a foot that did not develop properly. Okay, is he less human? No. Okay. Well, unfortunately, you have people out there, and if you go back, your history, right? You can go in history, we see this, but most especially in the last 100 years, you had the undercurrent in Germany in the lead up to the Holocaust, 20 years before the takeover of Germany by Hitler. You have research and papers being presented in 1918, 1919, 1920 Germany, and you could find this on Google, life unworthy of life. And they were presenting papers on that, life unworthy of life. And they defined a whole group of people that were unworthy of living, that they were less than, they weren't fully human. And because they weren't fully human, you could discard them at whim. Okay? And so Dr. King uses natural law because he knows that natural law is a bulwark against any kind of legal positivism that would allow for things like segregation and slavery and the out-and-out destruction of human dignity. What makes an I-it relationship dangerous as it relates to persons? This is where Dr. King quotes the Jewish philosopher Martin Buber. And Martin Buber talks about an I-you as compared to an I-it relationship. An I and you is a personal encounter between two persons, right? I and you. I see you as your own personal subject. You are a you. I am a you, and we're interacting with each other as persons, as equals, right? And we're sharing our humanity, right? What I'm doing right now, what I do in the classroom with you, I'm sharing myself with you. I'm interacting with you. You're interacting with me. An I-it relationship, on the other hand, reduces the person to that of a thing, right? We don't call people it. People are you, I, me. They're person. And it is a thing, okay? And it is a thing, right? I have right here for when we set up at Mass, right? We light the candles. Well, I have one of these lighters, right? This is an it. Did you find it? I wouldn't call this a you. I wouldn't call it an I. I'd call it an it because it's a thing. And when this thing no longer is working properly, when it's not able to light my altar candles when we set up for Mass, what do I do with it? I get rid of it. I throw it out because it's a thing. It no longer serves its purpose. Its value is completely functional. The value of this lighter is completely functional. When it stops its function, we get rid of it. Not so with a human being. We don't treat human beings like we're things. So slavery and segregation and all forms of sex trafficking, human trafficking, things that are happening even to this day, right? A human being is being reduced to that of a thing and is used and used and used and then discarded and thrown out as if it's a lighter or something else, a thing, some it. No, we don't do that. How does the 14th Amendment, excuse me, how does the 14th Amendment concerning equal protection under the law apply to Dr. King's examples of just and unjust laws? I got a tickle in my throat. Not good. How does the 14th Amendment concerning equal protection under the law apply to Dr. King's examples of just and unjust laws? And so here I provide you with the 14th Amendment. And, in the 14th Amendment, equal protection clause, right? The law has to be applied equally to all of us, right? So I actually provide you with the 14th Amendment, and then you got to kind of come up with the answer and be able to talk about that. So that'll be helpful. for you to look at that. So the 14th Amendment and how it applies to just and unjust laws. Why is the legal theory known as legal positivism incapable of dealing with the unjust laws of Hitler's Germany, for example? Let's never forget what Dr. King says in the letter when he says, always remember that everything Hitler did in Nazi Germany was legal. Legal. Okay? That bothers us, doesn't it? It should. It should. So much for everybody hiding behind, oh, you broke the law, you broke the law, you broke the law, you broke the law, you broke the law. Oh, I hear people say it all the time, even now. As if the law has always been sacred. No. The law is not inherently sacred. Oh, no, not human law. No. No. Big lie. Big lie. Don't believe it. Unfortunately, guess what? I'm in the minority out there. What I'm teaching you, most people don't agree with. Most lawyers, most judges don't agree with me. And guess what? They're wrong. They're bad lawyers. They're bad judges. Okay? Because they believe in the theory of legal positivism. Scratch a lawyer, as my one friend says, who's a lawyer. Scratch a lawyer and you get a legal positivist. Scratch a judge and you get a legal positivist. You just do. It is against the law. They don't stop to think, like, well, this law, maybe it's not a good law. Most people in the political realm, most people in the judicial realm are unfortunately totally taken in by legal positivism. And I can see why, because it requires no heavy lifting. Right? Remember the tension thing, right? Talking about the tension thing. Natural law, that's a gadfly. That's a gadfly. We don't like that. We just like to be able to write our own laws and do our own thing. Okay? And so legal positivism is incapable of dealing with the situation like Hitler's Germany. And by the way, we can pull up so many other issues. Modern day North Korea, China, okay? The Soviet Union historically, communist countries where it's illegal to publicly express your faith. You can't be a member of the Communist Party in China and be a practicing Catholic, for example. You have to pick one or the other. Oh, they'll let you go to church. Oh, you got to register with the state and let everybody know who. And what? Oh, by the way, what did we learn? What did we learn when we opened up the records going back in the 90s with the Soviet Union? The KGB had basically infiltrated every single church group. So the priest that was up there, well, he really was a KGB agent. Okay. He was actually an agent of the state, not a minister of the gospel. That's what would happen. Okay. So Dr. King points out your criteria, your legal conception of things, you have no answer for Hitler or for Stalin or for Mao. You can't answer them. And the reason why you can't answer them is because you've so tied yourself to the law. And that's what he's trying to say to his fellow Christian ministers in this letter. You keep telling me about the law, and I'm trying to beg to you and say, look, just because it's a law doesn't mean it's a good law. It's an unjust law, which is no law at all. And so it's important. It is very, very important for you, for me, for all of us to recognize that legal positivism cannot sustain the legal positivism that is the dominant theory of law cannot sustain a truly just society, because the criteria for the legal positivist is simply, is it the law? What did the court say? What did your legal system say? What did your political system say? Well, guess what? The political system of 1935 Germany, of 1938 Germany, said that to protect Jewish people was against the law. And if you did, you were liable to the death penalty. Okay? The legal system in 1950s Alabama said that if you were a person of color, if you were a black person, you had to give your seat up. That a just law? It was the law. Rosa Parks broke the law. Right? So much for the law is automatically holy. No, the law is only as good as its connection to, as Dr. King says, the eternal and natural law as revealed by God. Why is it wrong to think that time can cure all ills in society? Well, simply this. What is time? Does time have any power in itself? No. Time is a process by which we measure this thing called time, right? Right? Going around the orbit, right? Orbiting the sun, right? Going round and round, right? We get a year out of that, right? And it goes around, the way it goes around, and how many times it goes around, and so on and so forth. And the way it goes as it's orbiting around, right? Just going around and around and around and around and around, right? It's a way of measuring that reality. And so we see the effects of it. If I look at a picture of myself from when I first got here to Montgomery Catholic to now, I go, whoa, right? Day to day, I don't really notice much. But when I look at the 18 years, woo, what a difference. Okay. So we talk about that. So it does change the physicality that we experience. I can assure you, getting up in the morning is a little bit harder today than it was 10 years ago. Okay. But does it have the power to morally change? The answer is no, because time is not a rational, intellectual reality. It's just the experience of getting older. All right. Things are getting older. Time is taking place, right? There's a movement between point A and point B of something happening, and kind of what we talked about, the revolution around, right, going around and around and around, and eventually making its orbit around the sun, and that's a year, and da 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 da. But there's nothing moral about that. That's gravity in the physical realm, right? It's inanimate in the sense that it's not alive. And so the idea of, well, things will just change over time. No. People make things change over time. Rational, intellectual beings who have moral capacity can make things change over time. You can give lions, okay? You can give lions all the time in the world. They're not going to construct a moral society as we think of it, right? Lions are still going to be lions, right? But we can have the power of transformation because we are moral beings. And what did we talk about in the last, when we think back to the beginning of the year? We have rational souls. So we're body and soul. And we're not just body and soul, but we're body and rational soul. We're intellectual beings. We can say something's right and we can say something's wrong. Why does Dr. King at first recoil at being called an extremist, but then later embraces that label of being an extremist? Well, what did we say? The issue is not, will you be an extremist? The issue is, he says, what kind of an extremist will you be? And so at first he recoils at it because it's a pejorative. It's a negative term. You're an extremist. Riello, you're an extremist. You are so caught up in religion. If it was up to you, Riello, the kids would go to church all the time. The kids would pray all the time. And the kids would want to become priests and nuns. And that's all you care about, Riello. Well, a lot of that's probably true. I would be very, very happy if you all went to church on a regular basis every day, or we can go to mass every day at school. We have school mass almost all the time, right? Oh, my. If you start praying 15, 20, 30 minutes a day, reading your Bibles every day. Absolutely. Absolutely. It's not true that I want you all to become priests and nuns. That's not true. Because I need some of you to get married and have families and send them to Montgomery Catholic. And if you become a priest and a nun, well, I'll get out of my work and won't be able to work anymore because we won't have any students, right? Because you'll all be priests and nuns. No, we don't want that. That's not what if you're called to be a priest, if you're called to be a nun, absolutely, I want you to become a priest or a nun. But only if you're called, okay? And that's a process of discernment. But the reality of the matter is, yeah, you want to call me an extremist? All right, call. Look at the guy behind me. What Jesus do, right? Dr. King appeals to him, right? And he says, what did Christ do? He laid down his life for his friends. That's pretty extreme. He died on the cross. That's pretty extreme. He willingly died on the cross. That's like really, really extreme. That's what he did. And so he realizes, hey, you know what? Yeah, you're going to call me an extremist? All right, that's fine. That's fine. I embrace it. I'm going to be an extremist of love. Those that oppose me, those that oppose what we're trying to do, well, do you really want to be an extremist of hate? Because that's what you're doing. I want to be an extremist for love. And so he doesn't run from the pejorative being labeled an extremist. He embraces it. Just like Jesus, when Jesus was attacked and they said, this man eats with sinners and tax collectors. And Jesus doesn't say, oh no, I eat with sinners and tax collectors. Help me out. Oh, no, you don't understand. It's not like it at all. You don't realize. No, he doesn't say it. He eats with sinners and tax collectors. And you know what? Thank God for that. Thank God that Jesus eats with sinners and tax collectors, because I know this much. I'm a sinner and I need a savior. And so what they were trying to label Jesus with as some kind of a horrible extremist, look what he does, how dare he eat with sinners and tax collectors, actually becomes a badge of honor. Jesus died for sinners. He died for the bad people. And so Dr. King embraces that label as an extremist because he realizes you're either going to be an extremist for hate or from love, but you will be an extremist. What kind of an extremist will you be? Okay. On a couple of occasions, Dr. King speaks glowingly of the Declaration of Independence, writing here of its the majestic words. What is it about the Declaration of Independence that makes its words majestic? You know, I think what makes the Declaration majestic and why Dr. King repeatedly praises the Declaration, he calls it the soaring rhetoric of Jefferson or the majestic words, right, is tied to the fact of what we've been saying throughout. It declares something very unusual for its time. It says that governments don't give rights. The governments acknowledge rights. True government acknowledges rights. It doesn't give rights. It says that all men are created equal, that there are certain fundamental truths that are true of all and have nothing to do with you being a part of an aristocracy. They have nothing to do with you having royal blood or not having royal blood. But it has everything to do with the fact that you share the same blood with all people everywhere. And because of that, and by virtue of that, we are all created equal and endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights. Among these, the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That we have been given these rights by nature, or what we call natural law, and nature's God. And so this language truly is majestic. Those words truly do soar and lift us and say, no matter who we are, no matter where we've been, we are all equal under God and before each other. And that truly was revolutionary. That truly did mark out the United States, and as the late Father Newhouse would always point out, her experiment in ordered liberty as different. And that's what makes the tragedy of segregation and slavery so doubly wicked, because we knew better. We knew better. Those who helped establish this amazing country, and make no mistake about it, this is a great land with amazing people. But we often were blinded to that truth that all men are created equal. Not because we didn't know it intellectually, not because we didn't know it philosophically, not because we didn't know it theologically, but because we couldn't know it practically. Because money and cultural factors, peer pressure, can oftentimes make good people do things that, well, are not so good. I hope and pray that you take to heart what we've studied over the past weeks with the letter from a Birmingham jail. We started out September 22nd, the day before senior retreat, listening to Dr. King's audio. It is now October the 17th. And so we will have spent, when you take your test next week, we will have spent over 31 days, 31 calendar days, and about 20 or so school days digesting this great letter. And to be honest with you, of all the classes I've ever taught, you have been the most docile and embracing day to day, every day in class. You are making me so happy that every day we can spend time reflecting on these great truths. And so I pray and I hope that each and every one of you would recognize the amazing words of the letter from a Birmingham jail and the fact that this letter and the ideas behind it are rooted in Catholic theology, the writings of Augustine and Aquinas, and some of the greatest minds like Socrates that have ever lived. Thank you. God bless you all. And don't forget, have a great rest of the homecoming week. And Monday and Tuesday of next week, we will take our test on the letter from a Birmingham jail.